The Historical Society was founded as the Historical Society of Delaware in May of 1864, and most of us are aware of what was occurring at that time. It was the American Civil War, and this nation was in the throes of really tearing itself apart with the hopes of putting itself back together, but no one quite knew what it would look like in that new form.
Although there had been talk about establishing an organization that would start to really take care of the heritage of the state, it was probably the Civil War that gave that actual impetus for it to come about, and for people to really understand that these things can be easily lost, that the history can be easily lost and the things that represent the history. So they wanted a place where they could actually bring all these things together and be able to teach, successive generations about the importance of the history and the heritage of their state.
And originally it was, and I really like this phrase, it was for the elucidation of history, particularly as it relates to Delaware. So it was, yes, it was about preservation, but it was also about publications and reading papers and having programs. And as the society evolved over the next 150 years, it's refined that mission, and we collect much more than I think was collected originally. I think it was more early on about research and publication, which is still a fundamental part of the mission of this organization. But we really are a collecting, a preserving, and then a presentation of history organization.
There were a variety of people who were working to found the historical society. They were, at the time, as was indicative of the time, white males who founded the society, and that changed over the years, which I think is part of one of the exciting parts of our own history is the historical society. It really did. It was a reflection of what was going on in society.
It was an all-male, white membership makeup until 1895, when women were allowed to join as associate members, and I think annual dues for associate members in 1895 were $5. So we have women being introduced, and then in the 20th century and more recently, the membership has changed to reflect the population of Delaware and more largely the population of this country. Interestingly enough, the Delaware Historical Society has always had a Market Street address, beginning up around present-day Rodney Square on Market Street, where the public library is today. The organization rented a small building that was part of the First Presbyterian Church beginning in 1864. The first building that this organization owned on Market Street was Old Town Hall, which is in the 500 block. So that became our anchor, the first building to which we held title, purchased in 1916. And that was the home for decades of the entire operation of the Delaware Historical Society. In the early 1970s, the Artisans Bank building was purchased, which is the present-day research facility for the organization.
Then into Willingtown Square in the 1970s, which is right next to our research library and is comprised of several different buildings that were slated to be demolished and were basically brought to the space so that they could be saved because they represented earlier times and earlier periods in Wilmington's history. And then the Reed House was the next to be acquired in 1975 at the death of its last owner. And then finally, the Delaware History Museum in the 1990s. So really, it does run a full gamut of the 20th century, the acquisition of all of our properties.
One thing that you can attribute to this organization being here today, 150 years later from its founding, is that it has largely remained true to its mission. There's been refinement to that mission, but the organization collects, preserves, and presents the history of Delaware in a variety of forms, and today in a number of different media, through education programs, through research and publications, through exhibitions, online now. I mean, who could have ever imagined, even 25 years ago what online would be? But all of those are ways in which this organization uses the 3 million or so objects and items in the collection to educate, to inform, to give people today a perspective on the present, and perhaps inform us to some degree on where we might be going.
I would hope that we're still moving toward being as accessible as possible to as large a public as possible. I think that sometimes it's difficult when you're a small organization like we are to think beyond what you would normally do every day. And we've had some people that have been on staff for a long, long time, myself included. So we always need to work on thinking outside the box. And I think we've made some great strides forward in regard to that. I think that we have some wonderful possibilities that are in our future with the Center for African American Heritage. That's certainly a very important initiative for us, and we're looking forward to really where that can take us as far as growing outward, reaching a new public, and then, perhaps making some other friends along the way. So I think that we really do have to constantly look at how we can update ourselves so that we can be relevant to the current public, but at the same time, keeping our same values that we've always had of making sure that we're protecting those things that really tell the story of who we are.
Can you imagine a Delaware devoid of the historical collections of this organization? I mean, where would one turn for the answers to the history of this state, to the people of this state? Those collections are here to inform. Without them, we are uninformed, we are ignorant of certain things, and no one wants to see a society ignorant of its past and of its history.